So the ASM10 Legendary Abyssal Agent has finally been released to the public for COD Mobile on Global. I'm not sure if it was also released on Garena, but yeah. Anyways, I think it's time that since we now have two legendaries for this weapon, that we do a legendary versus video. So typically what I do in these types of videos is I kind of assess each legendary, I talk about all the features, and at the end of the video I decide which is the better legendary skin. I did this previously with the Razorback, which was of course the Necessary Diplomacy, and the Boreal Aegis. So yeah, it was a pretty interesting video. A lot of people had some different opinions. Some thought the Necessary Diplomacy was better, but I ultimately decided that the Boreal Aegis just had a lot more going on. So yeah, it's a pretty interesting thing, and it's nice to have like some sort of topic like this in Call of Duty Mobile. I feel like not a lot of people really make videos on these types of things. So that's why I'm here. So anyways, let's actually get into the history of the ASM10 and its legendaries. So obviously the first one is the Bunker Buster. This one came around Season 9 during the Gunsmith update. And it was the very first legendary for this weapon. It wasn't really anything crazy, and it wasn't reactive, but it was a legendary for this skin nonetheless. And this was during the time when the ASM10 was still pretty dominant in terms of just the assault rifles. So flash forward about maybe a year or so later, and now we have the newly released Abyssal Agent, which is the second legendary skin for this weapon. The only difference here is that this one's actually reactive. It's not a basic legendary skin, so of course it's going to be a little bit more expensive. So now that we got the history of the ASM10 legendaries out of the way, now let's talk about the first one in chronological order, which is the Bunker Buster. So like I said, the Bunker Buster is not reactive, so score 1 for the Abyssal Agent, I guess. But I will say that there is so much more going on with this skin compared to the Abyssal Agent. Yes, I know it has reactive effects, but this one, I don't know, like this one has like a lot more animations going on with it. There's smoke revolving around the entire gun. It has its own distinct muzzle flash, and the depth effect is far better than the Abyssal Agent currently. So the way this weapon looks is based on the theme of Season 9, which was of course the World War II theme. That theme pretty much came with the Kar 98, or I guess the Kilo bolt action. It was the very first marksman rifle that actually came with this game, and it was a pretty interesting time, and I was pretty excited to have my hands on this, but of course I didn't. And this is something I forgot to mention in the historical aspect in this video. They did have this in the For You section the first time it ever came out. So yeah, this was actually the first draw that I bought in a For You section. I don't know, man, the overall effects of this weapon, or just the animations, does look really, really nice. There's just sparks coming out. Like I said, there's smoke around the weapon, and I just like the little lighting effect that it has around the edges of the gun. It looks really, really nice. It gives it that real like burning and type of like melting type of theme. Of course, it's not without its downsides. I mean, the iron sight is cool and all, but I feel like it's more obstructing than the Abyssal Agent. The Abyssal Agent's a lot more open, so it kind of clears your view a little bit. But here, I feel like sometimes it's hard to see my enemies from longer ranges because of just how obstructing the iron sight is. Also, the unique muzzle flash can be a little distracting as well because it is kind of bright. Not as bright, of course, as the RPD Practical Joker. That one is just like batshit crazy bright, but this one's a little bit frustrating at times when you're trying to hit someone from a long range. But overall, it's a very, very solid skin nonetheless. If you're a person that uses the ASM10 on a regular basis, if you ever get the chance to buy this again, I recommend you do so. So now let's move on to the Abyssal Agent. So right away, just eyeballing it, the iron sight is far better than its Bunker Buster counterpart. I mean, honestly, it's something that we really needed for a legendary ASM10. Other features for this weapon, of course, includes its reactive effects, even though they're kind of lackluster until you reach the very final stage for the reactive effects, which is that little ball that's revolving around your gun. Everything else is pretty much shitty about this weapon. I mean, the reload animation just feels very unfinished in terms of sound, but I will say that the shooting sound is far better than it is with the ASM10 Bunker Buster. When it comes to the base animations, like what it starts off with in the very beginning of the match, it's not really that appealing, and it just doesn't feel right. Like I said, it feels very, very unfinished. So yeah, that's another thing to be aware of when you actually use this skin. Not to mention that the death effects also feel unfinished. I mean, they're not immediately turning into those little particles right away. It takes like a few seconds for it to kick in, or sometimes they just turn red and they just disappear, and that's it. Like I don't know, I just feel like the death effect doesn't feel quite right. It feels like it's unfinished, but hopefully it does get better later on in the future. Also keep in mind that there is no muzzle flash for this weapon. I'm using literally the same class setup as what you saw before with the Bunker Buster. So now it's time to actually assess all the upsides and downsides of both legendary skins. So first, for the ASM10 Bunker Buster, it of course has better visual effects, it's more polished, it has a muzzle flash unlike its Abyssal Agent counterpart, and it also has a much more finished death effect. Although the downsides is that the iron sights can be a little obstructing, as well as the muzzle flash itself. So now let's get to the Abyssal Agent side. It is reactive, so that is technically an upside. It does have a better iron sight as well as a different shooting sound, which is much more noticeable compared to the Bunker Buster. Although the downsides are much more noticeable compared to the ASM10 Bunker Buster. Of course, the reload sound doesn't feel complete. It feels like some of the sounds are missing. The visual effects overall, whether it's reactive or not, it doesn't really look like there's a lot going on with it. And the death effect also feels very unfinished, and it also lacks a muzzle flash. So it's pretty clear who is the obvious winner for this versus video. It's obvious the Bunker Buster just has a lot more going on with it. It's much more polished. There's not really a lot of issues with it other than just the iron sight and the muzzle flash, which isn't too much of a big issue. But when it comes to this weapon, or like when it comes to the Abyssal Agent, for a reactive weapon or for a reactive skin in general, it's just not doing it for me. I'm sure it's not doing it for a lot of you guys who bought this as well. I mean, even some of you guys commented telling me that it does look kind of ugly. I mean, one of you even went as far as to say it looks like a bird turd. So yeah, I'm not the only one that thinks that the Abyssal Agent should have been a lot better, especially for a reactive skin, which is also a lot more, well, just a little bit more expensive than the basic legendary skin. So anyways, that's pretty much going to end off this video. I hope you guys enjoyed. Make sure to leave a like, and make sure to also comment which one is your favorite legendary among these two. So anyways, guys, I'll see you next time. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.